there's several stories that I've managed to find here that are based around like ghosts, spirits, haunted houses and events that I thought we could have a little look at. The first one is called Crash Hand, and it's written by Cesar Augusto Nunez. There wasn't much about 2015 that didn't completely suck. My marriage was falling to pieces. My spouse had grown cold and indifferent. Our son hadn't been diagnosed with autism yet. He was still a toddler, but we knew there was something different about him. We knew something was wrong. By summer, I'd moved my belongings into the guest quarters, and that became my bedroom. It was the beginning of the end, with the two of us in bitter denial, or possibly waiting for the other to end it first. A 5 a.m. alarm got me up for work every weekday morning, and I spent most wakeful moments trying to find a way out of dump truck driving and construction. My spouse was less than supportive. I didn't have the funds for college. I was too busy to learn a new trade or skill. Once in a while, I'd come up with a cool sketch or painting. Sometimes I'd write a poem that people appreciated, but I didn't have the talent or skill to replace the earnings of my day job. So every weekday, it was a 10 to 12 hour shift of double clutching a tandem axle Mack. I'd haul a flatbed trailer with heavy equipment for a paving crew to get the mortgage and bills paid. The second Friday of June didn't seem any different from any other weekday. It was payday. I planned on spending time with my little one, putting him to bed and getting into a cheap bottle of whiskey before passing out in the guest room. For the time being, I was still on the clock and getting ready for my last run. My foreman, Mike, asked me as a special favour to take on an overloaded flatbed a few miles down the road. Normally I would have said no, but I liked Mike. I didn't want to argue, and I just wanted to wrap up the day and start my weekend. My worst case scenario, I thought, was an overload fine from a DOT officer. The crew loaded a paver, a skid steer and a roller onto a flatbed trailer designed to hold 2/3 of the combined weight of all of that equipment. Everything was already chained down. I told the guys I'd see them in the yard after I hooked up to the trailer. I eased off the clutch and into first gear. I could feel the Mack truck struggle to pull the overloaded flatbed trailer. I got to my first traffic light without demolishing the dump truck stopped ahead of me, only because I began to downshift and brake well ahead of time. I realised my seatbelt was off and tried to put it on, but it wouldn't budge. The light turned green, the sky opened up, and a torrential downpour pissed over everything in sight. I started driving, but kept the rig 10 miles per hour below the posted speed limit, convinced that that would keep me safe. I passed a quarry on my left and began my descent down a steep grade on the way to my stop. I got part of the way down the ominous hill and traffic was stopped ahead in the distance. I gently applied the brakes, but the truck tires started skidding on the wet road. The trailer began to jackknife over the double yellow lines into oncoming motorists. I eased off the brakes, regained control of the trailer and reapplied them. The same thing happened. All the while I'm still moving towards stop traffic, going 30 miles an hour downhill with a combined vehicle weight easily exceeding 60,000 pounds. The old country road had one lane headed down cars stopped ahead were now less than 2 tractor trailer lengths away, and I couldn't stop the truck. I thought about my wife. I remembered being in love with her before we started hating each other. I thought about my son. I thought about the people stopped ahead and their families. I thought about how much it was going to suck dying in a dump truck from colliding into the trees on the side of the road. A collision was inevitable, and there was no way in hell I was going to allow innocent motorists to get killed. My last run had turned into a suicide mission. Being a non-religious heathen, I thought, perchance there may be something close by, some ghost that watches over truckers and bikers, some spirit, perhaps, inhabiting those woods. I called out to it, "Make it quick." That was my first and final prayer to whatever sprite inhabits that forest. I didn't see any way possible I'd survive what I'd do next, and I didn't want to linger in agony following the crash. I just wanted my death to be swift. I turned the steering wheel away from the traffic and into the woods. As soon as my front wheels left the pavement, the bumpy wooded terrain shook me violently, throwing me into a world of hurt like I'd never known. As an at-risk teen, I'd been jumped, hit with chains and bats. Nothing I'd experienced could prepare me for the beating the inside of that truck put on every inch of my body. The trailer snapped off and headed into another portion of the woods. The truck roared into the forest with me as its hostage, mowing down vegetation, leaving hunks of metal all about as the tree branches of the forest fought back against this hostile, diesel-powered invasion. I gripped the wheel for dear life while smacking all about the console, the control panel, the shifter, and feeling every abrasive texture grind away at my flesh. The truck hit a big bump that sent me head first into the ceiling. Blood went everywhere. Then it hit a dip and skidded into a violent stop. A terrible pressure pushed into my chest. I thought I was having a heart attack. Somehow I didn't go flying through the glass as the horrifying ordeal came to an abrupt halt. As quickly as the crash ended, so did that awful blow to my chest. I exited the smouldering wreck that was once a sturdy Mack truck. I was covered in blood and had what seemed like a sheet of plastic, a grocery bag perhaps, stuck to my head. What hurt more than anything at the moment was my chest. It couldn't have been the steering wheel. It wasn't a heart attack. I didn't know what it was that kung fu the ever-living life out of my sternum. I was just glad that I was still alive. Only moments later I was getting put into a C-collar, strapped to a backboard, and loaded into an ambulance by paramedics. My Blitz t-shirt, my favourite punk rock shirt, was blood-soaked and sheared off me by the medics. They took my vitals and asked questions meant to gauge my level of consciousness. Then, for a moment or two, they fell silent. "Am I going to make it?" I joked as I turned my head to see both medics staring at my sternum, mouths agape and eyes bugged out in bewilderment. After a second, they assured me everything would be fine and continued with routine measures during medical transport. I thought about the day's events at the hospital. I got all doped up by the docs, got my scalp stapled and bandaged, and got admitted to my room. I thought about my terrible judgment, the last-minute decision, the dying man's prayer, and the blow to the chest whilst crashing and somehow not flying through the windshield. I thought about it all in my hospital room. I stood bare-chested before a mirror, gazing at my bruise. Across my chest, spanning about 12 inches in length, was a deep purple mark shape of a giant, ghastly hand. That was the creepy one. There was quite a bit to that story that I missed out. You probably notice in my face. It was quite graphic, and I know everyone's got different tastes. I don't want to read that for everyone. It just might freak up some people out, so I left it out. But if you do want to read the gory parts, you can find this story on Creepypasta. The next based on true event story that I found is called the Glendale Horror. This was written by Cesar Augusto Nunez again, same as the last one. At first, the drinking days were fast, fun, and filled with hilarity. Booze was cheap, and so were musical performances at venues and other places. Parties were easy to find too. Crashers were even welcomed as long as they weren't empty-handed grifters and scrubs. The economy was fine, jobs were aplenty, and none of us had spouses or children back then. In the 90s, we didn't have internet access or smartphones, not even regular cellular phones. I think a handful of us had pagers. We relied on word of mouth, zines or flyers for the scoop on social events. It was rare to be all dressed up with no destination on a weekend night in Northern Virginia. We were just a short drive from the nation's capital. Killing the third to last beer of the 12-pack of ale, Eddie asked, "And what about a strip club?" with an audible slur in his loud, overbearing speech. "Don't you guys want to see some chicks?" I rolled my eyes and looked over at Jason, who had a similar reaction. As appealing as the idea sounded, we spent the majority of our weekend spending cash already. We had no idea of what was going down that night or where the rest of the gang was. Remember, no cell phones. If you got left behind, that was that. If you were stuck at home. If you were lucky, someone would call and let you in on where the action was. We didn't even have enough money for one of our sorry asses to get a lap dance, and Eddie was talking about painting the town red. Eddie, my kid brother, was acting like a moron, but that's how 19-year-olds act when they drink too much. Jason was his same age, but somehow managed to keep his cool better than Eddie. I was 2 years older than both of them, making me the only legal one to buy booze. We didn't have a clue. What we did have was $26, a Honda Civic with a full tank of gas, and the motivation to keep things rolling. We weren't about to call it a night just yet. "Nando," Jason said to me, "it's 12 o'clock and no one's called. If we leave now, I can get us across the border and at a checkout counter well before 2. I'm sure if something's going down, the boys will leave us a message on the answering machine." Jason was right. I don't know how it is now, but back then any place in Virginia that sold liquor was legally obligated to lock up their booze at midnight. Alcohol sales between midnight and 6 a.m. were strictly prohibited. However, Maryland sold booze until 2 a.m. I can't count how many times we did 90 miles an hour or faster across that Woodrow Wilson Bridge, over the Potomac River, and into the state of Maryland, just for a 12-pack and some cheap ghetto wine. A fly-by-night, last-minute beer run sounded like it could be enjoyable. Finally, someone was starting to make some sense. I laced up my docs and brought a mag light in case of road rage. I concealed it in the inside pocket of my bomber jacket and made for the car. Eddie threw on his chucks and his hoodie and grabbed his mag light too. Before we knew it, we were in Jason's Civic, jumping on 495 with Baltimore's very own gut instinct, blaring through the Kenwood tape deck. Hardcore isn't the same these days. journey as well as the destination that were both so exhilarating to us. At the end of the line were containers full of that ice-cold, gut-warming, magical elixir that would make us feel woozy and take us to God knows where. Drinking was our favourite pastime, followed all too closely by the social deviance that came with it. Vandalism, petty theft, street scuffles and other forms of criminal mischief paired with public intoxication were always the best laughs all round. The background music was hardcore punk. We didn't have a care in the world, and if you weren't one of us, it was your loss. Traffic was dead. A cool night air settled in and the bridge was in sight. We were almost there. We were making good time, so I made Jason slow down lest we get pulled over. Aside from driving a little drunk, which was easy to talk your way out of back then, we had nothing illegal on us. No drugs, no weapons, no explosives. As long as we didn't speed, we'd be in the clear. Jason knew of a spot, and we took an exit just a few miles into Prince George's County, Maryland. We always made our night time. Maryland beer runs quick. We stuck together and tried not to draw attention to ourselves. As quiet as we were, people still stared when we entered the liquor store. We said nothing. We grabbed 2 12-packs of Killian's and 3 40-ounce bottles of Crazy Horse malt liquor before making our way to the checkout line. It was while we were in that line that Eddie spotted a copy of a local rag with a story about an abandoned hospital vandalised by local youths. It wasn't my first time hearing about that abandoned hospital, Glendale Hospital in Bowie, MD. I'd been there once with some punks from Richmond. The place was intense. Dozens of vacant, rotting buildings of older architectural style scattered the property with a network of underground tunnels, mostly flooded, connecting the above-ground structures. We got high and played tag that time. As I told Jason and Eddie about it, I could see how stalked they were getting. How do we get there? Asked Jason. We had booze, motivation, and somewhere to be. I felt optimistic about the evening's improvisational adventure unfolding. The increase in vegetation and further collapse of the hospital wards enhanced the experience. The eerie resemblance to the backdrop of a sci-fi horror film or comic was uncanny and thrilling. We immediately regressed in our delight and played as children on a jungle gym. The mag lights came in handy for their actual intended purpose. Half an hour later of running round the grounds and scouting the perimeters, we were ready to brave the rusty cages. We entered with caution. The damp air reeked of mould, oxidation, pigeon poo, spray paint, and God knows what else. There were glass shards with bits of Brillo scattered about and freshly spray-painted tags on the walls. We were on land that previous visitors, once possibly with worse intentions than ours, had claimed. We should have left, but we pressed onwards. After half an hour of not coming into contact with other humans, we let our guards down. We found dormitories, labs, a morgue, journals and magazines. We discovered underground passages that connected above-ground structures. Jason almost fell into an empty elevator shaft. We climbed up and onto the roofs of several of the largest buildings. The network of hallways, tunnels and chambers was amazing. Then the thrill and drunkenness both began to subside. The harsh reality that was our playground was a place where people were quarantined for incurable diseases and left to die. These barren walls and drab colours were the last home they knew before they retired to an early grave. It was a hard thought that led to our decision to go find the Civic and head for the bridge. It really should have been that simple. Leaving the hospital, we heard footsteps, voices, and that unmistakable static-filled feedback on a handheld radio. We ducked out behind an entryway, shut off our mag lights, and kept quiet. We knew exactly how to go about situations like this. No words needed to be exchanged. We all knew what to do. We kept quiet and kept our cool and simply waited for the cops to go away. Those 8 minutes went by as slow as an hour. That's how long 8 minutes seem when you're standing in the pitch black with your kid brother and your friend, not uttering a peep and hoping you won't spend the night in county jail. Following the trail that brought us in, we gradually sneaked our way to the Civic. Thankfully, it had not been discovered and towed by police patrolling the area. Impound fees were beyond our budget and we were in the middle of nowhere. It was just past 3:30 a.m. We had our fill and were ready for bed. Sweaty and smelly, we plopped our soggy asses into the tiny Japanese hatchback. We lit some smoke, cracked some brews, and headed for the bridge. Who would have thought such a poorly planned night could go from being a total bust to being such an event? With the windows down and music on, we made for the freeway, mistakenly convinced that the peak of our adventure was well behind us. We laughed at the patrol trailer on our way out. The fatigue and the alcohol probably had a lot to do with our getting lost. Getting lost was what led to the arguments that followed. Each of us arrogantly proclaimed his own righteousness, insisting that the predicament was surely the fault of the other two parties. It was ridiculous. At some point, Jason pulled over at a truck stop and got directions back to 495. Thanks to the full tank we started out with and the fuel efficiency of his ride, we had plenty of juice to get us back on track. We were so far off the grid, it was pathetic. Once we knew we had the right directions, we apologised to one another and laughed about how far from home we were. Jason got drowsy but was coherent enough to co-pilot the trip. Eddie was drooling on the back seat with his eyes closed. I took the helm and followed my friend's directions to our home in Fairfax, Virginia. At some point, we ended up on a winding, desolate stretch of freeway. To this day, I cannot remember what route we were on. 2 lanes went one way and 2 lanes the opposite on a road almost completely devoid of light, save for that provided by the moon and the stars. It was almost 4:30 in the morning. How true it was, they say, that it is the darkest before the dawn. The headlights piercing the pitch black ahead reminded me of our mag lights leading our way through that maze of decay just a few hours ago. What a night we had had. Jason had given me the last of the directions and closed his eyes to pass out. It was many miles but few turns to get us back to 495, so I took the sole responsibility of our return navigation. As the front left fender of the car seemingly devoured the dotted lines on the road, I could see the tree lines on either side of the car in my peripheral vision. I glided down the right lane. Ever so gradually, the tree line in my left peripheral vision faded from sight into the abysmal blackness. It was as if someone had draped the left side of the Civic with a giant black curtain, blocking out everything to the left of the vehicle from sight. I winced, blinked, and shook my head, attributing it to the onset of extreme fatigue. "Jason, wake up! Jason!" He groaned some swear words. "Look, dude, I'm nodding out. You gotta take the wheel." As that last sentence came out of my mouth, I felt my pulse race and my stomach rise to my throat. Although I did not fully comprehend what was happening, I got the undeniable feeling in my gut that something was seriously wrong. The dark mass was quite clearly a large moving object, A vehicle perhaps, with no headlights, marker lights or tail lights. No lights at all. It mysteriously navigated the twists and turns as effortlessly as if it were daylight out. All the while it kept pace with the Civic, staying dangerously close to our left. "What the hell is it, man? What's going on?" Jason's sweaty back was pressed against the inside of the front passenger door while he outwardly panicked. He awakened to a state of perplexity and terror that exceeded my own. I tried to outrun the dark mass. I got the little hatchback up to 114 miles an hour, and the dark mass didn't skip a beat. When I slammed on my brakes, it slowed down as well. It was almost as if it was an extension of our own vehicle. I couldn't shake him for the life of me. Eddie, by now, was fully awake. Unlike Jason, he was so full of fear, he had fallen dead silent. My panic gave way to anger. "Brace yourselves, hold on to something," I shouted at my two passengers as I attempted to sideswipe the object. That too was of no use, as it turned in direct response to the Civic. I shouted and cursed through my open window. Just then a light came on. It was my mag light. Jason was shining it on the object. Once we realised what it was, in fact a big black car, Jason attempted to blind the driver with the mag light to get him to leave us alone. "Take that," we shouted as we laughed and cheered, pleased with ourselves and our childish antic. When all the lights of our unwanted neighbouring vehicle, including the interior dome light, simultaneously came on, our laughter fell silent. The pilot and the passenger of the mammoth-sized vintage hearse that taunted us mercilessly were virtually identical. Their grotesque appearance forced Jason to retreat with the mag light. The interior dome light of the hearse revealed the silhouette of two large individuals that both looked putrid. I literally mean they looked like animatronic cadavers. They looked as though they could almost be 7 feet tall, standing. The driver's hands were so huge that they made the steering wheel look small. Between glancing forwards at the road ahead and staring at the ghastly scene beside me, I took in what I could. I tried to tell myself they were wearing masks, but the rancid appearance of their facial flesh matched the necrotic hue and texture of the driver's hands. Both were clad in outdated formal attire. In spite of the lights on their vehicle being activated, the precision of their navigation was still a mystery. Both figures had their gazes fixed on us and not on the road ahead, while somehow managing to make the necessary manoeuvres to avoid a collision. Once again, as a last-ditch effort, Jason aimed the maglite beam at the driver's face to make him go away. "Oh my god, oh my god." I didn't know what had just happened, but Jason was losing his mind. "What is it, man? What happened?" I yelled. Eddie spoke up. "Don't look, Nando. Don't look. Don't speed up. Don't slow down. Just keep your eyes straight ahead and keep driving." The whole thing sounds so absurd when I talk about it to people nowadays. It truly doesn't do any of the experience any justice at all. We didn't mention the hearse incident for years. On the night of Eddie's bachelor party, Jason and I were somehow able to find humour in the memory, but Eddie was not. The very mention of the incident almost ruined the event. We never brought it up in front of him again. Jason and I too eventually got married and started families. A distance grew between us, but somehow we managed to maintain a friendship. We laughed about the whole thing and decided it was all part of some prank intended to keep us away from the area. It made things easy for us, but it doesn't explain a lot. Someone once told me what is seen cannot be unseen. I don't have many regrets in my life, but I regret looking. Eddie was firm when he contriving not to look at the hearse to my left. My curiosity got the better of me. The flashlight revealed unsettling features that I can't make sense of. Both pilot and passenger were in a total state of decay. Their mouths and eyes, wide open, lacked any sign of human resemblance. The mouths had no teeth or tongues. The eyes were empty, cavernous pits of darkened meat. When I gazed into their faces, I instantly felt an indescribable emptiness wallow up inside of me. It was the lowest low I'd ever felt in my entire life. That's the best way to describe it. The very sight of their faces seemed to draw any kind of positive energy I had inside of me right out. To call the incident dramatic would be a huge understatement. But Jason and I force a laugh when the story comes up. We say it was a hoax even though it doesn't adequately explain what we experienced. It doesn't even make sense of their speedy getaway. After I saw their faces, we began to approach a stretch of highway lined with streetlights. Once again, I tried to outrun the abominations that followed. I got the Civic up to 120 miles an hour this time, but the hearse began to pass. In fact, it accelerated to such an awesome extent, it dwindled our 120 mile an hour travel speed to a seeming standstill, leaving us as if we were stopped at a traffic light. As it did so, the engine and electronics inexplicably gave out in the Civic, and we began to slow down to a stop. As our vehicle decelerated, we could see the hearse continuing to race forward up ahead. We watched each streetlight it passed flicker uncontrollably before completely powering down, then it vanished from our sight. We still insist on telling ourselves it was part of a show of some sort, a ploy on the part of the locals to keep troublemakers at bay, a way to scare off hooligans and trespassers. It doesn't add up, but it works for us. It makes it easier for us to sleep at night. That one reminds me of a Stephen King sort of story. I like that one. The third and final story I'll read is called The Well. I can't actually see who wrote it. No, I can't find the author, but it's got a very high rating out of 10, 8.96. So it must be a good little story. My father grew up on a chicken farm outside of Krakow, Poland. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82. A few days before his passing on, due to an aggressive form of stomach cancer, he sat me down next to him in his old rocking chair and said in his familiar Polish accent, "After I took the boat to New York, I promised to leave this story behind." He didn't look up as he spoke to me, simply staring into his cup of black coffee. It's been 70 years and I must tell someone before I meet God. I was born in a small, quaint, empty town which, despite the Nazi occupation, still functioned. We lived in this 2-bedroom farmhouse, my father, mother, and my brothers Michael and Igor. I'm sorry you never got to meet any of them. Anyway, Michael and Igor were twins, identical twins actually, and we had heard rumours of the Nazi fascination with identical twins. This forced us to be even more reserved, even though we already lived in a secluded part of the countryside in the last occupied house in the town. In order to avoid going to the occupied towns, we basically ate only chicken and eggs for every meal, and whatever else Mama could gather from the garden. It was lonely, but we survived. The thing that was most difficult for me was the fact that I had to sleep in the basement. Due to Michael and Igor being toddlers, they required my father and mother's attention. The basement was cold, with only a small window, and the moonlight was the only light that I got. Because of this, I always delayed going down there until I was absolutely exhausted, so I wouldn't lie there awake. On the nights that I couldn't manage to sleep, I would look out of the window, which gave me a small view of the garden and the large abandoned water well. This was my daily activity throughout those lonely, war-torn nights. In general, it was boring and uneventful, but occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a family, or even just a man or two lovers, sneaking their way through our garden up to our front door. They always looked rushed and frightened, and sometimes wore tattered uniforms. What would follow were horrible sounds of banging and pleadings for whoever lived there to open up, followed by an argument between my father and mother whether we should let them in. He moved in the chair to adjust himself. You see, son, we didn't know it, well, at least I didn't, that we lived fairly close to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and those people were escapees. Well, did your father let them in? I asked impatiently. No, he said. It would have been a death sentence for them as well as us. The Nazis didn't like Poles, but they tolerated us, and it was easier to hide Michael or Igor than an entire family. My father did what he had to do in order to keep his family alive. As the war went on, fewer and fewer people began showing up in the middle of the night. That's about our time our chicken and vegetables began to disappear. Losing our only supply of food would not have been tolerable, and at that point my father suspected it was the escapees, so he built a fence around our property. Despite this, the chickens continued to disappear. They weren't killed, they were simply gone, just vanished from their cages and pens. One night I decided to stay up myself in order to see if I could find out the answer. I battled my tiredness until the wee hours of the morning, and despite the poor lighting and rain, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a human figure run across the garden. I rushed upstairs to tell my father, and he ran outside with a knife, the best home defence weapon he could afford, but he found nothing, no one. The next day we did find something though, footprints leading from the chicken cages to the water well. They were made in the wet mud from the rain, and they were of bare feet. No shoes, no socks, just feet. My father had mercy on the man who was trying to find refuge and left him a note indicating that he had 2 days to leave and that he would begin to seal the well. I waited impatiently for my grandfather to tell me about the fate of the man. The following night I got the idea to take a blanket down to the well to the man since winter was creeping in. I waited until my parents were asleep and I snuck outside. I shouted something friendly down the well, indicating to the poor man that my intentions were benign, and I began my descent, clinging hand and foot to the pegs attached to the stones. As I neared the bottom, I smelled something absolutely horrific, and I pulled my father's flashlight from my pocket to try and shine it on the man. It was just then that I came to the realisation of how large the well was, having been used to supply water for the entire town and its families in the past, families which no longer remained. But I found no man, only a hole, a gap in the stone where the wall of the well had collapsed, opening up to some type of crevice only 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep and tall. Inside sat not a man, but an entire family, of which only a single skeleton-like creature survived. The light reflected off of its sunken eyes and grey skin. Blood covered its face, and chicken carcasses were strewn everywhere, a pile of decomposing poultry beside a woman and what I suspected had been her son and daughter, children who couldn't have been much older than 5 years old. And they seemed to have been dead for weeks. The man, if he could even be called that, just gazed at the light, and I stared back, incapable of breaking his stare. simply crouched motionlessly without a sound next to the putrefying bodies of his loved ones and the chickens that must have been his source of water as their meat was uneaten. He was empty, devoid of whatever in us makes us human. He should have realised the members of his family had died long ago, but he was still bringing them food. He couldn't accept it. He did finally turn his head though, when I shone the light back onto the corpse of his daughter. He stared at her, and then sat down closer to her, and continued his vigil. "You can leave now," I said to him. "I'll open the gate so you can escape. My father will seal the well in the morning. Please leave now." My young voice and advice seemed to have no effect on him. At that moment I decided it would be better for me just to climb back up the well and leave, and hope the man would follow and escape. As I began my climb, I shone the light on him one last time. "What did you see, Grandpa?" I shuddered. I saw a tear fall from his eye. He had become a man once again. He was only able to break free from the delusion after seeing the body of his daughter, which had, until that time, been obscured by the darkness. He realised then that he'd been bringing food not to his family, but to corpses. That night it rained again, but in the morning when my father returned to seal the well, I found no footprints leading out of it. That's sad. Well, that's it for our 3 creepypasta stories. After finding this website, realised that this is going to be a source of many a video because I love this stuff. I love creepy stories, and this is full of it. So keep an eye out for more creepypasta stories. If you read creepypasta regularly and have any recommendations of authors or stories that you want to hear, please fire them my way and I'll give them a look and I'll give them a read. That would be fantastic. Well, once again, I'm going to thank you for your continuing support. I felt so good after uploading my last video, returning to all after a bout of illness. Your support just reminded me of why I do this, not only for the love of ASMR, but you guys are incredible, so thank you so much for all your support. I hope this video helped you chill out and relax, whatever